The alarm on my console screamed before I even had my coffee in hand. I am Ethan Miller, communications officer aboard the UES Mercy, a relief ship built for one purpose: getting doctors and supplies to people who need them. That morning, the deep space relay lit up with a signal so weak it almost got lost in the static. A distress call, not a military one, a medical one. I traced the origin point with shaking fingers. The signal came from a cluster of worlds near the edge of charted space, a coalition of small alien nations we had only briefly interacted with before. Their name for themselves translated roughly to the Valari Accord: gentle traders, builders, not fighters. The message repeated on a loop, translated by our onboard systems into rough but clear words. This is the Valari Accord, requesting urgent medical assistance. Our worlds are under siege. We have wounded beyond count. We ask only for doctors, for medicine, for ships to carry our people to safety. We do not ask for weapons. We do not ask for war. Please, if anyone can hear this, send help. I sat frozen for a moment, listening to the fear in that voice. Whoever recorded it had tried to sound calm. They had not succeeded. Captain Laura Bennett walked onto the bridge moments later, her boots echoing against the metal floor. She was not a tall woman, but she carried herself like someone who had already survived worse mornings than this one. "Report," she said, not looking away from the main screen where the message was still playing. "Distress call from the Valari Accord, Captain. They are requesting medical aid. Doctors, supplies, evacuation transport. Nothing more." She listened to the recording twice before speaking again. "Nothing more," she repeated quietly, almost to herself. "That is what worries me." I did not understand what she meant. Not then. To me, this was simple. A species was suffering, and we had the ability to help them. Humanity had done this 100 times before, across 100 different star systems. We loaded our ships with medicine, with clean water purifiers, with surgical teams who had seen every kind of injury the galaxy could offer, and we went. Within the hour, Command confirmed the mission. The UES Mercy would lead a relief convoy to Valari space. I felt a small swell of pride reading the orders. This was who we were. This was what humanity did when someone called out for help. But something in the official orders caught my eye as I reviewed the manifest. Escort designation. Medical logistics support. I frowned at the screen. Escort ships were common on relief missions, usually a pair of light patrol vessels meant to scare off pirates or debris fields. But the number attached to this designation was not 2. It was 43. 43 ships listed under medical logistics support. I brought it up with Lieutenant Daniel Price, who worked systems analysis 2 stations down from mine. He had a habit of chewing on the end of his stylus when he was thinking, and he was chewing on it hard as he stared at the same numbers I had just seen. "That's not a medical escort," he said slowly. "That's a fleet. Maybe it's a clerical error." He shook his head. "Command doesn't make errors like that. Not on a fleet manifest. Somebody wrote that on purpose." I wanted to ask more, but the ship's intercom called all department heads to briefing, and I was left staring at that strange number, 43, wondering what kind of medical mission needed that many ships behind it. The briefing room was full by the time I arrived, packed with officers from departments I rarely interacted with. Weapons systems, tactical planning, fleet coordination. None of these people usually attended relief mission briefings. I felt a small knot form in my stomach as I took my seat near the back. Admiral Henry Cole stood at the front of the room, a broad-shouldered man with gray hair cut short and a face that did not smile easily. He had commanded 3 major fleet operations before I was even old enough to join the service, and his presence alone was enough to quiet the room. "You have all seen the distress call," he began. "The Valari Accord is under attack. Their message asked for medicine and doctors. That request will be honored in full. Every wounded person who calls out to us will receive care." He paused, letting his eyes move across the room. "But we are not sending doctors alone into a war zone. We never have, and we never will. Whoever is attacking the Valari has not identified themselves, and that tells me they expect no resistance. They are used to striking the weak and walking away clean. That ends the moment our ships arrive. A murmur ran through the room. I glanced at Daniel, who gave me a look that said he had been right after all. This will be officially logged as a medical relief operation, the Admiral continued. That designation is accurate. Every ship in that convoy, armed or unarmed, exists to protect the wounded and deliver aid. We do not send healers into danger without shields. We never have. I raised my hand before I could stop myself. The Admiral nodded toward me. Sir, will the Valari Accord know what is coming? Their message specifically said they did not want weapons. The Admiral's expression softened slightly, though only slightly. They will learn what they need to know when we arrive. For now, understand this. A promise to heal someone and a promise to protect them are not two different promises. They are the same one. We are simply the species that finally stopped pretending otherwise. The room fell silent after that. I did not fully understand what he meant. Not in that moment, but I would understand soon enough. We departed 6 hours later. I stood at my station on the bridge as the Mercy's engines came online, feeling the familiar hum beneath my boots as the ship prepared for transit. Around us, on secondary screens, I watched as the rest of the convoy assembled in formation. Cruisers, destroyers, support vessels bristling with defensive systems I did not recognize. 43 ships, all listed under one gentle-sounding designation, all preparing to answer a call for bandages and medicine. Captain Bennett stood beside me for a moment, watching the same screens. "You still look confused, Miller," she said, not unkindly. "I don't understand why we need this much force for a relief mission, Captain." She was quiet for a moment, her eyes fixed on the formation of ships outside. "Because the last time humanity sent aid without protection," she said, "we lost every doctor on board before they ever got to treat a single patient. We do not make that mistake twice. Not ever again." I did not ask what had happened. Something in her voice told me it was not a story meant for casual conversation. The transit alarm sounded, and the stars outside the viewport began to stretch and blur as the ship prepared to jump. I gripped the edge of my console, my heart beating faster than it should have for a mission that was supposed to be about saving lives, not fighting for them. Somewhere out there, the people of the Valari Accord were waiting for us, expecting soft-spoken doctors and gentle transport ships. They had asked for healers. They had no idea what humanity actually considered the first step in healing anyone. The jump hit, and the stars vanished into streaks of light, pulling us forward into the unknown, toward a people who thought they understood what kind of help was coming. They were about to find out how wrong they were. So, we dropped out of transit into chaos. The moment the stars snapped back into place outside the viewport, alarms across the Mercy's bridge lit up all at once. Not our alarms, sensor readings from the system ahead, a storm of energy signatures, debris fields, and distress beacons all overlapping into a wall of noise that made my display flicker as it tried to process everything at once. I am Ethan Miller, and in that moment, staring at the sensor readouts of a system under siege, I understood for the first time just how badly we had misjudged the scale of what we were walking into. The Valari home system spread out before us on the main screen. 3 inhabited worlds, all showing signs of damage. Orbital stations reduced to drifting wreckage. Defensive platforms, what few the Valari had, burning silently in the vacuum. And moving among the ruins, a fleet of dark angular ships that did not belong to any species in our database. "Identify hostile fleet," Captain Bennett ordered, her voice sharp and controlled. "Working on it, Captain," Daniel called from his station. "No match in our records. Whoever they are, we have never encountered them before." I turned my attention to my own console, opening a channel toward the Valari communication frequency that had sent the original distress call. Static answered me at first, then a broken transmission, weak and desperate. "This is Valari Central Command, unidentified fleet. Please respond." Are you the ones who answered our call? I looked toward Captain Bennett, who nodded once. I opened the channel fully. Valari Central Command. This is the UES Mercy, responding to your distress call. We have arrived with a relief convoy and medical support. There was a pause on the other end, long enough that I wondered if the signal had dropped. Then a new voice came through, higher-pitched, clearly under enormous stress. Medical support? Your ships. They are not. They cannot be medical ships. We see 43 vessels. Warships. You brought warships to answer a request for doctors. I opened my mouth to respond, unsure exactly how to explain something I myself did not fully understand, but Captain Bennett stepped in, taking the comm directly. This is Captain Laura Bennett of the UES Mercy. Yes, we brought warships. We also brought doctors, medicine, and every piece of equipment needed to treat your wounded. Both of those things are true at the same time. We do not send one without the other. Another pause. When the Valari voice returned, it was quieter, almost confused. We ask for healers, not for soldiers. You are getting both, Bennett said simply, because in our experience, healers cannot do their work while people are still trying to kill them. Now, Central Command, I need you to tell me everything you can about the fleet attacking your worlds. How long have they been here, and what have they wanted from you? There was a long silence before the Valari officer spoke again, and when they did, their voice cracked slightly. They call themselves Nothing We Understand. They arrived 11 days ago. They do not negotiate, they only take. Resources, technology, and our people, when they can capture them alive. We have no way to stop them. Our defenses were never built for this kind of enemy. I felt something cold settle in my chest as I listened. 11 days. 11 days of a peaceful, gentle species trying to survive against something they had never been prepared to face. Captain Bennett turned toward the tactical station, where Commander Grace Turner, our senior tactical officer, had already begun analyzing the enemy fleet's positioning. Commander, assessment, Bennett said. Turner's eyes did not leave her screen as she spoke. Enemy fleet numbers approximately 60 vessels, Captain, spread across 3 primary staging points near the inhabited worlds. Their ship design suggests raiding tactics rather than full-scale invasion, fast, lightly armored, built for hit-and-run engagements rather than sustained conflict. Meaning they came expecting no real resistance, Turner said. Their formation is loose. Overconfident, they have been picking apart an undefended system for over a week without meeting anything that could push back. Bennett nodded slowly, her jaw tightening. That changes today. Before I could process what that meant, new readings flashed across my console. Movement in the enemy fleet. A cluster of their raiding ships had broken formation and were now moving directly toward our convoy at high speed. Captain, incoming vessels, 12 of them, on direct intercept course, I called out. They see us as easy pickings, Turner muttered. They think we are more of the same, more relief ships to strip apart. Bennett's expression did not change, but something in her posture shifted, becoming still and focused in a way I had not seen from her before. Fleet-wide channel, she said. Now. I patched her through instantly, connecting her voice to every ship in our convoy. This is Captain Bennett, UES Mercy, Senior Officer present. We have hostile contacts inbound, direct intercept vector. These forces have spent 11 days attacking an undefended civilian population. They are not expecting resistance. We are going to correct that assumption. Defensive formation only, protect the medical transports at all costs, and remind them why humanity does not send healers without protection. Bennett out. The response across the convoy came almost immediately. Ships that had been quietly gliding in formation moments before now shifted with practiced precision, forming a protective wall around the medical transports at the center of our fleet. I watched on my screen as the human warships moved not with panic, but with the same calm efficiency I had seen surgeons use in an operating room. Like this was simply another problem to be solved. The enemy raiders closed the distance quickly, clearly expecting to punch through weak defenses and scatter our convoy the same way they had scattered the Valari fleet 11 days earlier. They were not prepared for what met them instead. Our lead cruisers opened fire with precise controlled bursts, not wild or chaotic, but calculated strikes aimed with an accuracy that seemed to catch the enemy completely off guard. Two of their raiding ships broke off immediately, their formation collapsing into confusion. Another attempted an aggressive charge toward one of our medical transports, only to be intercepted by a human escort vessel that placed itself directly in the line of fire without hesitation. I watched the exchange on my screen with my heart pounding, gripping the edge of my console so tightly my knuckles turned pale. This was nothing like the peaceful relief missions I had trained for. And yet, watching our ships move, I realized something strange. There was no panic in their movements. No desperation, just quiet, disciplined purpose, the same purpose I had seen in every doctor who had ever walked calmly into a chaotic emergency room and simply started working. Within minutes, the 12 enemy raiders that had charged our convoy were either disabled, retreating, or destroyed. The remaining ships pulled back sharply, clearly recalculating whatever assumptions had brought them charging toward us in the first place. Silence fell across the bridge as the immediate threat passed, broken only by the quiet hum of our ship's systems and the sound of my own breathing, which I only now realized had been coming in short, tight bursts. Captain Bennett exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing only slightly. "Casualties? None reported across the convoy, Captain," Turner said. "Minor damage to 2 escort vessels. Nothing critical." Bennett nodded, then reopened the channel to Valari Central Command, her voice steady once more. "Valari Central Command, this is Captain Bennett. The immediate threat to your position has been addressed. Our medical teams are prepared to begin evacuation and treatment operations immediately. Please direct us to your most critical locations." There was no immediate response. When the Valari officer finally spoke again, their voice was filled with something I had not expected to hear after everything they had endured. Disbelief. "You destroyed them. In minutes. They have tormented us for 11 days, and you destroyed them in minutes." "They were not expecting resistance," Bennett said simply. "Now, please, Central Command, time matters for your wounded. Where do you need us?" As coordinates began transmitting to our navigation systems, I sat back in my chair, trying to process everything I had just witnessed. We had come here to deliver medicine and bandages, and within hours of arriving, we had already fought and won a battle against an enemy that had terrorized an entire star system without resistance for over a week. I glanced toward Daniel, who looked just as stunned as I felt. "I think I finally understand what the Admiral meant," I said quietly. "About healing and protecting being the same promise." Daniel nodded slowly, still staring at the tactical display where the retreating enemy ships continued to pull back toward the edge of the system. "Yeah," he said, "I think this is only the beginning." He was right. Because somewhere in that retreating enemy fleet, word was already spreading about what had just happened, and soon, whoever commanded those raiders would have to explain to their superiors why the soft, peaceful species they had been warned about had just torn through their forces without breaking formation once. I turned back to my console as new transmissions began flooding in from across the Valari worlds below us, voices filled with a strange mixture of relief and confusion, all of them repeating some version of the same disbelieving question: who exactly had answered their call for help? The enemy did not retreat far. I am Ethan Miller, and 3 hours after our first engagement, I watched their fleet regroup at the edge of the system, gathering their scattered raiding ships into a tighter formation. Whatever confidence they had lost in that first encounter, they were clearly trying to rebuild it, and I had a sinking feeling they would not make the same mistake twice. Our medical teams had already begun landing on the surface of the closest Valari world, a planet called Threnna, where the worst of the fighting had taken place. I watched the feeds coming in from our ground teams with a strange mixture of pride and heartbreak. Dr. Grace Miller, no relation to me despite the shared name, led the primary surgical team, and her voice over the comm channel was calm, even as she coordinated treatment for dozens of wounded Valari civilians at once. "We need more transport capacity down here," she reported. "The injuries are severe. Crush wounds, burns, exposure. These people have been surviving in bunkers for over a week, with almost no medical care." Captain Bennett authorized additional transport ships immediately, and I watched as more of our convoy peeled away from the defensive formation to assist with the evacuation efforts. It was strange, watching warships descend not to attack, but to carry stretchers and supplies. A Valari official named Solon Vey, who I learned was the closest thing their government had to a coordinating leader during the crisis, requested a direct conversation with Captain Bennett. I patched the call through to the bridge, curious despite myself about what the alien leader would say now that the initial shock of our arrival had worn off slightly. Solon Vey appeared on our main screen, a tall, slender being with pale blue skin and large dark eyes that seemed permanently wide with exhaustion. Their voice, translated through our systems, carried a weariness that went beyond physical tiredness. "Captain Bennett," Solon Vey began, "on behalf of the Valari Accord, I offer my deepest gratitude for what your forces have done today. But I must ask you honestly, why did you send warships to answer a call for doctors? We specifically requested no weapons. We feared what weapons might bring." Bennett considered the question carefully before answering. "Because we have learned, through difficult experience, that sending healers into danger without protection accomplishes nothing except adding more names to the list of the wounded. Your request was for medical support. What you received was medical support, delivered by people willing to ensure that support actually reaches those who need it." Solon Vey's large eyes blinked slowly, and for a moment I saw something shift in their expression, something between confusion and a dawning understanding. "You do not see them as separate things," Solon Vey said slowly, "the healing and the protecting." "We used to," Bennett admitted. "A long time ago, we sent unarmed aid into places that were not safe, and we watched good people die before they ever got the chance to save anyone. We do not make that mistake anymore. Every doctor we send out into danger, we send with people willing to stand between them and whatever threatens their work." Valari leader was quiet for a long moment, processing this. When they spoke again, their voice had softened considerably. "Your species is strange to us, Captain. Gentle enough to send doctors halfway across known space to help strangers, yet fierce enough to destroy an enemy fleet within minutes of arriving. We did not know how to understand that combination." Bennett allowed a small, tired smile. "Most species don't, at first. We have found it is usually easier to demonstrate than to explain." The conversation ended shortly after, with Solon Vey providing us with detailed information about the extent of the damage across all 3 inhabited Valari worlds. The picture that emerged was grim. Entire communities displaced, critical infrastructure destroyed, thousands wounded, with medical facilities completely overwhelmed even before our arrival. I spent the following hours coordinating communication between our medical teams on the ground and the ships still in orbit, relaying supply requests and casualty reports. It was exhausting work, but it felt meaningful in a way that made the earlier combat feel almost distant, like something that had happened in a different story entirely. That distance did not last long. New sensor readings appeared on the tactical display just as the sun was setting over Threna's capital city, where our largest medical operation was currently underway. The enemy fleet, which had been quietly regrouping at the edge of the system, was moving again. This time their numbers had grown. "Captain, I'm reading enemy reinforcements," Turner announced, her voice tightening. "Their fleet strength has nearly doubled since the first engagement, estimated 85 vessels now converging on our position." Bennett's eyes narrowed as she studied the projected enemy movement. "They called for backup." "Looks that way, Captain," Turner confirmed. "And this time, their formation is tighter, more disciplined. Whoever commands that fleet learned something from our first encounter." I felt my stomach tighten as I watched the enemy formation on the display, sharp red markers moving steadily toward our position with far more coordination than the scattered raiders we had defeated earlier that day. "Recommendations, Commander?" Bennett asked. Turner studied the tactical layout for a long moment before responding. "Our medical teams are still on the surface, Captain. If we pull our ships back to consolidate defenses, we risk losing coverage over the ground operations. If we hold position to protect the surface teams, we fight this new fleet at a numbers disadvantage." Bennett was silent for a moment, her eyes moving across the tactical display, weighing options that I could only partially understand. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and spoke with the same calm certainty she had shown during the first engagement. "We hold position," she said. "Our people are on that surface, and so are theirs. We do not abandon a treatment site regardless of the odds above us. Signal the convoy. Defensive formation. Priority protection on the medical transports and surface support routes. We are not moving." The order spread across the fleet immediately, and I watched as our ships adjusted their positioning once more, forming a tighter shield around the planet below, prioritizing the routes our shuttles used to move wounded from the surface to orbiting medical ships. I opened a channel to Dr. Miller on the surface, my voice tighter than I intended. "Doctor, we have a large enemy force inbound. Command has ordered us to hold position and protect the ground operation. I need you to prepare for a possible increase in wounded and potential evacuation delays." Her response came back steady, though I could hear the tension underneath it. "Understood, Ethan. We will keep working. That is what we came here to do." I closed the channel and turned back to the tactical display, watching the enemy fleet grow closer with every passing minute. 85 ships, moving with far more discipline than their earlier counterparts, closing in on a convoy that, despite its strength, remained fundamentally what it had always been, a relief mission, willing to become a battlefield if that was what protecting its purpose required. The first enemy volley struck our outer defensive line 20 minutes later, and the true battle for the Valari system began. The sky above Threna's capital lit up with streaks of light as our defensive line met the enemy's opening assault. I am Ethan Miller, and I had never experienced anything like the following hour of my life. The bridge of the Mercy became a storm of shouted reports, shifting tactical displays, and the low hum of the ship's systems working at their absolute limit. Around us, our convoy held its formation, absorbing the enemy's attacks while pushing back with the same calm precision I had witnessed earlier that day. The enemy fleet, numbering 85 ships, struck our outer defensive line with far more coordination than their earlier counterparts. They had clearly studied our first engagement, adjusting their approach to avoid the same mistakes. Waves of smaller vessels darted between our larger warships, attempting to slip past our defenses toward the shuttle routes connecting Threna's surface to our orbiting medical ships. "They are targeting our supply lines," Turner called out, her hands moving rapidly across her console. "They know we cannot abandon the surface operation. They are trying to cut us off from our own people." Bennett's jaw tightened, but her voice remained level. "Redirect Escort Squadron 3 to reinforce the shuttle corridor. Do not let a single transport go unprotected." I watched on my screen as 3 of our escort vessels broke away from the main formation, moving swiftly to intercept a group of enemy raiders attempting to slip toward one of our medical shuttle routes. The engagement that followed was fast and brutal in its efficiency, our ships moving with the same disciplined precision as before, cutting off the enemy's approach before they could reach the vulnerable transports. Down on the surface, Dr. Miller's voice came through my headset, steady, despite the chaos audible in the background. "Ethan, we just received word that Shuttle 4 is under attack near the northern corridor. We have 12 critical patients on board that transport." My stomach dropped. I relayed the information immediately to Tactical, watching as Turner adjusted our defensive coverage to prioritize the threatened shuttle. On screen, I watched one of our smaller escort ships peel away and accelerate toward the northern corridor at maximum speed, weapons already engaging the enemy vessels closing in on the defenseless medical transport. The escort ship placed itself directly between the enemy raiders and the shuttle, absorbing incoming fire while providing enough cover for the transport to complete its jump to orbit. I held my breath the entire time, watching numbers and status reports flicker across my screen, until finally the confirmation came through. Shuttle 4 has reached orbit safely, Turner announced. All patients accounted for. A wave of relief passed through the bridge, though there was no time to fully process it before new threats appeared on the tactical display. The enemy fleet, having failed to break through our defenses in a single coordinated push, began adjusting their strategy, splitting into smaller groups, attempting to overwhelm our defensive line from multiple directions at once. Bennett studied the shifting formation with narrowed eyes. "They are trying to spread us thin. Should we consolidate our position?" Turner asked. "No," Bennett said firmly. "If we consolidate, we open gaps in our surface coverage. Hold formation, trust the training. Every ship knows their assignment." I marveled, even in the middle of the chaos, at the calm confidence in her voice. This was not blind stubbornness. This was a woman who trusted her people completely, who had faith that the discipline and preparation behind every ship in our convoy would hold even under pressure. And it did. Over the following hour, I watched our convoy weather wave after wave of enemy attacks, never breaking formation, never abandoning the surface operation, adapting fluidly to each new tactic the enemy attempted. It was nothing like the chaotic, desperate battles I had imagined when I first joined the fleet. It was controlled, purposeful, almost surgical in its precision, the same careful, deliberate energy I had seen from every doctor I had ever worked alongside. Slowly, gradually, the enemy's coordinated assault began to falter. Ship after ship in their formation was disabled or forced to retreat, their earlier discipline crumbling under the sustained pressure of our defense. By the time the enemy fleet finally began a full withdrawal, the sky above Threnna had gone quiet, except for the distant hum of our own ships continuing their protective patrol. "Enemy fleet is retreating, Captain," Turner reported, exhaustion evident in her voice for the first time since the battle began. "Estimated 40% of their force disabled or destroyed. No further hostile contacts detected." Bennett exhaled slowly, her shoulders finally relaxing. "Casualties on our side?" "2 escort vessels, with moderate damage. No loss of life reported across the convoy," Turner said. "Ground operations report 17 wounded among support personnel, all treatable, none critical." A quiet murmur of relief spread across the bridge. I sat back in my chair, my hands trembling slightly as the adrenaline that had carried me through the last hour began to fade, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion I had never experienced before. It was during the quiet aftermath, as our medical teams continued their work uninterrupted on the surface below, that I found myself in a conversation I would remember for the rest of my life. Solon Vey had requested to visit the Mercy in person, a gesture that surprised our command staff, given the Valari's usual preference for remote communication. When they arrived, escorted through our corridors by security personnel, they seemed smaller somehow than they had appeared on screen, their pale blue skin carrying a grayish tint that I now understood to be a sign of exhaustion in their species. I was asked to assist with translation support during their visit, and found myself walking alongside Solon Vey through the ship's observation deck, where the stars stretched endlessly beyond the reinforced viewport. "Your ships fought for hours today," Solon Vey said quietly, watching the distant lights of retreating enemy vessels fade from view. "Not for territory, not for resources, for strangers who could offer your species nothing in return." "That's usually how it works," I said, unsure how else to respond. Solon Vey turned to look at me directly, their large dark eyes filled with a curiosity that felt almost childlike despite the weariness behind it. "I do not understand your species, Ethan Miller. You send doctors to heal us, and warships to protect those doctors, and you call both of these things the same mission. Why?" I thought about the question carefully before answering, remembering conversations I had overheard among older officers during my training, stories about a period in human history that most people preferred not to discuss in detail. "A long time ago," I began, "humanity almost destroyed itself. Not through outside attack, but through our own conflicts, our own inability to protect the people trying to help each other. We had healers who wanted to save lives, but no protection for them, so they died alongside the people they were trying to save. We had soldiers who wanted to protect people, but no understanding of what came after the fighting stopped, so the wounded were left to suffer even after safety was achieved. Sol and Vey listened intently, their expression unreadable but attentive. Eventually, I continued, we learned that those two things cannot be separated. Healing without protection is temporary. Protection without healing is meaningless. So we stopped treating them as separate missions. Every relief convoy we send carries both, because sending only one half of the promise means the promise was never real to begin with. A promise, Sol and Vey repeated softly, as if testing the word. You consider this a promise. We consider every distress call a promise, I said. Whoever calls for help is trusting that we will actually deliver it, completely, not partially. Sending doctors without protection into a war zone isn't help. It's just a slower kind of failure. Sol and Vey was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the stars, processing something that seemed to shift deeply within them. We feared your warships when they arrived, Sol and Vey finally said. We believed you had misunderstood our request, or worse, that you intended something beyond what we asked for. We did not understand that the warships were never separate from the medical support. They were always the same gift. Now you understand, I said gently. Now I understand, Sol and Vey agreed, their voice carrying a quiet weight that told me this realization would shape how their entire species viewed humanity from this point forward. Your kind does not simply answer distress calls, Ethan Miller. You answer them completely, without half measures, regardless of the cost to yourselves. I did not have a response to that, so I simply stood beside them in silence, watching the stars, thinking about everything that had happened since that first weak distress signal reached our systems. Below us, on the surface of Threnna, our medical teams continued their work through the night, treating wounds both old and new, working alongside Valari doctors who had spent 11 days trying to save lives, with dwindling supplies and no support. The partnership that formed between our teams that night would become the foundation for everything that followed in the days ahead. But as I stood on that observation deck, watching Sol and Vey's expression slowly shift from fear to something closer to trust, I had no idea that the true test of humanity's promise had not yet arrived. The enemy fleet had retreated, but they had not given up. And somewhere beyond the edge of the system, their commanders were already preparing a response that would make our first two battles look like nothing more than a warning shot. 3 days passed in relative quiet, though quiet is a strange word for what those days actually held. I am Ethan Miller, and during that time our medical teams worked without rest, moving between makeshift shelters and orbiting hospital ships, treating thousands of Valari civilians who had suffered through 11 days of siege before we ever arrived. Dr. Miller and her surgical teams barely slept, and I found myself assisting wherever I could, coordinating supply drops, translating messages, and simply being present in a system that had finally begun to feel safer than it had in weeks. Sol and Vey visited the Mercy twice more during this period, each time bringing updates on the recovery efforts across all 3 Valari worlds, and each time asking careful, thoughtful questions about humanity that suggested a growing understanding rather than simple curiosity. I found myself looking forward to these conversations, small moments of calm amid the ongoing recovery work. But Admiral Cole's warning, delivered during a routine briefing on the second day, reminded everyone aboard the Mercy that this calm was unlikely to last. Long-range sensors have detected a significant buildup of enemy forces near the edge of the system, he reported through a secure channel from his flagship, the UES Valiant, which had arrived 2 days earlier to reinforce our position. Their numbers far exceed anything we've encountered so far. This is not a raiding party anymore. This looks like a full retaliation force. I felt the same knot of tension return to my stomach that I had experienced during our first 2 engagements, though this time it carried a different weight. We had won our previous battles through discipline and preparation, but the sheer scale of what Admiral Cole described suggested something far beyond what a defensive convoy alone could handle. "Recommendations, Admiral?" Captain Bennett asked. "Reinforcements are already inbound," Cole replied. "Fleet Command has authorized a full response. We are not simply defending this system anymore, Captain. We are making a statement. Whoever is commanding that enemy fleet needs to understand, completely and permanently, that humanity's promise of protection does not weaken under pressure. It strengthens." The following day, additional human warships began arriving in the system, their formations joining our existing convoy until the combined fleet numbered well over 200 vessels. I watched the tactical display grow more crowded with each passing hour, a visual representation of just how seriously humanity took the promise made to a species that had asked only for doctors. Solon Vey, watching the buildup from the Mercy's observation deck alongside me, seemed both amazed and unsettled by the scale of the response. "This is far more than we ever imagined possible," they said quietly. "We asked for medicine, Ethan Miller. We never imagined an entire fleet would answer." "You didn't ask for an entire fleet," I said, "but the people attacking you didn't give us a choice. When someone threatens the promise we made, we don't scale back, we scale up." The enemy's retaliation force arrived on the 4th day, and the moment it did, every screen across the Mercy's bridge filled with numbers that made my breath catch in my throat. Over 300 enemy vessels, arranged in a massive, disciplined formation that dwarfed anything we had faced in our previous encounters. Admiral Cole's voice came through the fleet-wide channel, steady and unwavering despite the overwhelming numbers displayed before us. "This is Admiral Henry Cole, Senior Commander, Human Relief and Defense Fleet. To the approaching force, you have spent 11 days attacking an undefended civilian population, and 4 days attempting to punish us for interfering with that attack. This ends now. You have one opportunity to withdraw peacefully. If you choose not to take it, you will learn exactly why humanity's medical convoys are the most heavily protected missions in known space." There was no response from the enemy fleet, only the steady approach of their massive formation, closing the distance toward our position with grim determination. "They're not stopping," Turner reported, her voice tight with focus rather than fear. "Then we proceed as planned," Cole replied calmly. "All ships, engage Defensive Protocol Sierra, protect the medical convoy, and surface operations at all costs. This is what we came here to do." The battle that followed was unlike anything I had witnessed in my life, and unlike anything I ever hoped to witness again. Our combined fleet moved with a coordination that seemed almost impossible given the sheer number of ships involved, each vessel executing its role with precision honed through years of training and shared purpose. Where the enemy relied on overwhelming numbers, we relied on discipline, adapting fluidly to every attempted breakthrough, every attempted flanking maneuver, every desperate push toward our vulnerable medical transports. I watched from my station as human ships absorbed devastating attacks without breaking formation, as smaller escort vessels placed themselves between danger and defenseless shuttles without hesitation, as our forces methodically dismantled an enemy force that had once terrorized an entire star system without meeting a single moment of resistance. Hours passed in what felt like both an eternity and the blink of an eye. Reports flooded my console constantly, updates on enemy losses, on our own ship's status, on the continued safety of the surface operations that remained our true priority throughout the entire engagement. Despite the overwhelming scale of the battle, our medical teams never stopped working, protected throughout by a fleet that refused to let anything interrupt the promise they had made. Slowly, gradually, the tide of the battle shifted. The enemy's massive formation, so intimidating upon arrival, began to fracture under sustained pressure. Ships that had advanced with confident aggression now pulled back in confusion, their command structure clearly struggling to adapt to an opponent that simply refused to break regardless of the odds against them. "Enemy formation is collapsing," Turner announced, disbelief evident in her voice despite hours of exhausting combat. They're retreating, Admiral. Full withdrawal across all sectors. A collective exhale swept across the bridge, though the exhaustion in the room was palpable, a weariness that came not just from physical strain, but from the emotional weight of everything that had happened over the previous 4 days. Admiral Cole's voice, when it came through the channel again, carried a quiet satisfaction rather than triumph. "Cease pursuit," he ordered. "Let them go. Our purpose here was never conquest, it was protection. That purpose has been fulfilled." The enemy fleet's retreat marked the true end of the crisis in Valari space, though the following days brought a flood of communications from Valari worlds across the system, voices filled with gratitude, relief, and a newfound understanding of exactly what kind of species had answered their call for help. Solon Vey requested one final conversation with Captain Bennett and myself before our fleet began preparations to depart, now that the immediate crisis had passed and Valari forces, rebuilding with our continued support, could begin managing their own recovery. We met in the same observation deck where Solon Vey and I had spoken days earlier, though the atmosphere felt entirely different now. The exhaustion remained, but it was accompanied by something new: hope. "I have spoken with leaders across all 3 of our worlds," Solon Vey said, addressing both Bennett and myself. "Every one of them wishes to express the same sentiment. We called for healers, and we received far more than we ever imagined possible. Not simply protection, but partnership, understanding, a promise kept completely, without hesitation, regardless of the cost." "That's who we are," Bennett said simply. "It's not something we do occasionally. It's something we do every time someone calls out for help." Solon Vey turned toward the viewport, watching the stars beyond, their large, dark eyes reflecting the distant light. "The galaxy speaks of humanity in many ways," they said quietly. "Some call your species generous, others call you naive, believing your gentleness makes you weak. I do not think either description is accurate anymore. I think humanity is simply honest about what help actually requires." I thought back to that first distress signal, weak and desperate, requesting nothing more than medicine and doctors. I thought about the confusion and fear that had followed our arrival, when 43 warships appeared, instead of the gentle relief convoy the Valari had expected. I thought about everything that had happened since, the battles fought, the lives saved, the quiet moments of understanding that had grown between 2 very different species over the course of a single, extraordinary crisis. "We didn't send warships instead of medical support," I said softly, almost to myself. "The warships always were the medical support. They just made sure the doctors actually got the chance to do their work." Solon Vey turned to look at me, a small, tired smile crossing their features, the first genuine expression of relief I had seen from them since our arrival. "I understand that now, Ethan Miller," they said, "and I believe every Valari alive today understands it as well. We asked for help, expecting kindness without strength. What we received instead was proof that true kindness has always required strength to protect it." As our fleet began final preparations to depart Valari space days later, leaving behind a small contingent to assist with continued recovery efforts, I stood once more on the observation deck, watching the 3 inhabited worlds slowly shrink into the distance behind us. I thought about the mission's official designation, the words that had seemed so strange to me when I first read them back on the day we departed: medical logistics support. At the time, it had felt like an odd way to describe a fleet of 43 warships. Now, I understood completely, because somewhere across known space, other distress calls were undoubtedly being sent at this very moment, other desperate voices requesting help from whoever might be listening. And when those calls reached human ears, the response would remain exactly the same as it had been for the Valari Accord. Doctors would come, carrying medicine and compassion for anyone who needed it. And warships would come with them, not instead of that promise, but as an inseparable part of it. Because humanity had learned, through hard experience, that a promise to heal someone and a promise to protect them were never truly 2 separate things. They were, and always would be, exactly the same promise. As the stars stretched into streaks of light around us, carrying our fleet toward whatever call for help would come next, I found myself thinking that the galaxy was only beginning to understand what it truly meant when humanity answered a distress signal. They had expected medical support. They had gotten so much more than that. And somewhere out there, other species who still believed humanity's gentleness made them weak were about to learn the same lesson the Valari Accord had learned. The hard way, if necessary, but always, without exception, completely,